in the year 958 in the frozen lands of Scandinavia, where the winter sun barely touched the horizon, something beyond human comprehension began to manifest. The Norse sagas, those ancestral manuscripts written on sheepskin, held secrets that Christianity preferred to ignore. Secrets about men who were not just men. During the long northern nights, when darkness reigned for months, the elders told stories around the fires. They spoke of warriors who wore wolf and bear skins, men who transcended the limits of human flesh. They called them Berserkers, those who wear the bear shirt, and Ulfhédnar, those who wear the wolf skin. But these were not mere poetic metaphors. The Icelandic manuscripts, preserved in the monastic libraries of Reykjavik, described with disturbing detail what happened when the transformation occurred. According to the Völsunga Saga, written in the 13th century, but recounting events from centuries earlier, two brothers, Sigmund and Sinfitli, found two wolf skins hanging in an abandoned hut in a forest. The text is clear. When they put on the skins, they could no longer remove them, and something inside them changed. They were no longer men. They howled like wolves. They hunted like wolves. They killed like wolves. For 10 days and 10 nights, they ran through the Scandinavian forests in lupin form, until finally the skins fell off and they regained their humanity, exhausted, feverish, with no clear memory of what they had done. The Catholic Church, as it expanded across northern Europe, encountered these accounts. The Benedictine missionaries who arrived in Iceland in the 10th century were horrified. This was not common paganism. It was something much darker. In 972, Bishop Frederick of Hamburg wrote to Pope John XIII reporting beastmen who serve ancient demons and tear Christians to pieces in the forests. But what truly terrified the church was not just violence. It was the systematic nature of it. The Berserkers were not lone murderers. They were elite warriors, organized into bands, serving the Norse kings. Harald Finney, the first king to unify Norway, kept an entire personal guard composed of these wolfmen, and there were laws, written laws, that regulated their existence. The Eyrbyggja saga preserved an episode that casts disturbing light on the true nature of the Norse werewolves. In the year 983, an Icelandic farmer named Uday, son of Katla, was accused of mutilating his neighbor's livestock. When the men of the Thing, the Viking law assembly, went to arrest him, they found something extraordinary. Katla, Odd's mother, was known as a Valva, a sorceress. When the officials first arrived at the farm, Odd had disappeared. They only found Katla sitting, calmly spinning wool. The men searched the house. Nothing. They returned a second time. Again, only Katla was there, now combing what appeared to be a goat in the yard. The men swore it was Odd transformed, but they could not prove it. They left her under surveillance. The third time, they brought a Christian woman named Geirith, who knew the old practices. She covered Katla's face with a sealskin bag to block the evil eye, and ordered them to break the bench where the witch was sitting. Under the bench, cowering and trembling, was Odd. What is fascinating about this account is not just the transformation, but the method. Katla had not used a potion or elaborate spell. She had simply altered the men's perception. The Norse concept of hamar, which means both form and skin, suggested that the transformation was not necessarily physical. It was a change in the hammer, in the skin essence that surrounds the soul. The 13th century scholars who compiled these sagas were already Christianized, but they preserved the details with archaeological fidelity. Snorri Sturluson, the great Icelandic historian, wrote in the Ynglinga Saga that Odin, the Norse supreme god, changed his form. His body lay as if asleep or dead, but he became a bird or animal, fish or serpent, and traveled in an instant to distant lands. This ability, Hamfarir, the journey of the form, was not seen as demonic by the Norse. It was a gift from the gods. But when Christianity arrived, everything changed. Saint Olaf, who forcibly Christianized Norway in the 11th century, promulgated specific laws against the berserkers, not because they were violent. Viking societies celebrated violence, but because they represented the old religion. In 1025, Olaf declared, "No man shall keep berserkir or practice the hamuramor, under penalty of 3 years of exile." But the laws prove that the practice continued. Norwegian legal documents from 1042 record the case of a man named Thor who suffered from involuntary fits of berserkir. He pleaded with the Bishop of Bergen for a cure. The prelate advised him to make a solemn vow to God and to rescue an abandoned child, an act of Christian mercy. According to the record, Thorir was cured, but the document adds a sinister detail. Before the cure, when the fits came, he ran on all fours and howled, and no man could stop him. The transformation did not happen smoothly or mystically. It was violent, brutal. According to the Rolf's saga, when the warrior Björn was cursed by his stepmother to become a bear, the metamorphosis occurred daily at dusk. The text describes, "At eventide, he felt a terrible fever. His hands swelled, hairs began to sprout from his skin, his nails darkened and curved like claws. And then he lost human consciousness. During the night, he was a bear." At dawn, the process reversed, leaving him exhausted, feverish, covered in wounds he did not remember suffering. This clinical description of the symptoms is remarkable. The medieval compilers of the sagas clearly interviewed people who claimed to have suffered or witnessed such transformations, and there is a consistent pattern. The change came with twilight, was accompanied by fever and convulsions. The individual lost memory and control, and upon returning to human form, felt extreme exhaustion. These are symptoms that modern doctors would recognize. But there is another, even more disturbing aspect. The sagas repeatedly describe the fury of the berserkir, an altered state of consciousness in which the warrior became immune to pain, insensitive to fire or iron, endowed with superhuman strength. The Egils saga narrates how Egil Skallagrimsson, Iceland's greatest poet warrior, descended from a lineage of his grandfather Kveldolf, Evening Wolf, received this name because at dusk he became so wild that few dared to speak to him. A specific episode is revealing. Kveldolf, already elderly, participated in a naval battle against King Harald. According to the saga, at twilight, Kveldolf was seized by the wolf's fury. He and his men wore no armor. They bit their shields, advanced like dogs or wolves, and were strong as bears or bulls. They killed men, but neither iron nor fire injured them. After the battle, Kveldolf fell into a deep exhaustion. He remained in bed for 3 days, as if dead. This pattern, superhuman fury, followed by extreme collapse, appears in dozens of sagas. It cannot be mere literary convention. It is too specific, too consistent. Something real was happening to these men in the year 1133. A Benedictine monk named Saxo Grammaticus began to compile the Gesta Danorum, the history of the Danes. Among its pages, he preserved an account that the Church preferred to forget. There were 7 brothers, sons of a Swedish king, who possessed such knowledge of poisons and sorceries that oft, seized by sudden fury, they howled like dogs, bit their shields, devoured burning coals, crossed through fires, and no remedy calmed them except the suffering of chains or the shedding of human blood. Saxo was an educated man, trained in Paris, skeptical by nature, but he adds, "I saw with my own eyes descendants of these men, and the curse persists in their veins." This comment is explosive, a 12th century scholar admitting to personally having witnessed the lycanthropic condition. And he is not alone. William of Newburgh, an English chronicler, wrote in 1190 that in Saxony there are men who at certain times of the year are forced by the nature of their blood to run as wolves, and in this state commit terrible atrocities. Gervase of Tilbury, educated in Bologna, who served the Holy Roman Emperor, declared in 1211 in England, with the changes of the moon, certain men transform into wolves, which they call werewolf, for wer means man in English, and wolf means wolf. These are not superstitious peasants. They are the brightest minds of the time, historians, chroniclers, men of science, all confirming the same phenomenon, and all pointing to the north as the origin. Medieval universities began to investigate in 1252. A medical treatise produced in Salerno, the largest medical center in Europe, classified lycanthropy as a form of melancholy, but the treatise admits in Germania and Norse lands the condition manifests differently than in the south, with apparent transformation of the form. Apparent transformation. Not real, but apparent. This detail is crucial. Medieval doctors, with their limited science but rigorous were arriving at a surprising conclusion. The transformation might not be physical, but perceptual, an alteration in consciousness so profound that the individual himself, and sometimes those around him, perceived the change as real. But there was a problem with this theory. The dead do not lie, and the dead were appearing. In 1290, a case in Bergen, Norway, forced the church to confront the phenomenon directly. A farmer named Elf was accused of murdering 3 children during a period when he claimed to have transformed into a wolf. The Bishop of Bergen convened an ecclesiastical court. The records survive. Ulf confessed everything. He described how, at nightfall, he felt a fire in his blood. He removed his clothes, put on a wolf skin he kept hidden, and rubbed himself with an ointment made of herbs and fat. Then, he said, he ceased to be a man. He did not clearly remember what he did in the following hours, but at dawn he found himself naked in the forest, covered in blood that was not his, exhausted, terrified, and the children in the region had been found torn to pieces. The court should have condemned him to the stake, but the bishop hesitated. He ordered Ulf to be examined by doctors. The physicians reported, "This man suffers from fits that steal his reason. His pupils dilate until they cover the entire iris. Foam comes from his mouth. His strength triples. After the fit, he remembers nothing and falls into a deep stupor." The bishop made an unprecedented decision. He declared, Alf possessed not by a demon, but by a disease of the blood and mind. He condemned him not to death, but to life imprisonment in a monastery where he would be treated by monks. Ulf lived for 15 more years under monastic custody. According to the records, he never suffered another fit. Did the prayers cure him? The monks' herbs, or simply the removal of the ointment and the wolf skin. The final document, written by the abbot, who supervised Ulf, concludes with a phrase that would be quoted by demons. We saw the confluence of three evils: the ancient Norse sorcery, the weakness of fallen flesh, and the malice of the enemy. When the three unite, the man becomes a beast. But by the grace of God and the remedies of the Church, the pact can be broken and the soul restored. This conclusion that lycanthropy was simultaneously medical, psychological, and spiritual would dominate European thought until the Enlightenment. But it left one question unanswered. If the ointment and the skin were necessary, where did they come from? Who provided them? And for what purpose? The witchcraft tribunals of the following centuries would try to answer these questions, and the answers they would find would be more terrifying than any ancient legend. In the year 1328, the archives of the University of Paris recorded a debate that would last 3 days and shake the foundations of medieval theology. The question in dispute: could a man, in fact, transform into a wolf? On one side, the Thomists, followers of St. Thomas Aquinas, argued that such a metamorphosis violated the natural laws established by God. The essential form of man was immutable. Any appearance of transformation would be a demonic illusion. On the other, a group led by the physician Arnald of Villanova presented disturbing evidence. Arnald had served as a royal physician in Aragon and personally treated 3 cases of lycanthropy. He brought documents, witnesses, and something more. He brought the ointments. According to the account preserved in the Sorbonne archives, Arnald demonstrated before the master theologians the effects of an ointment seized from a man accused of lycanthropy into. The substance was composed of herbs, henbane, deadly nightshade, wolfsbane, mixed with human fat. I applied a small amount to the skin of a convicted volunteer, Arnald reported, and within minutes the man fell into a deep stupor. His eyes rolled back. He began to convulse. He grunted and bit. When he woke up 3 hours later, he swore he had run through the forest as a wolf, even though he had never left the cell. This experiment, brutal by modern standards but revolutionary for the time, proved something crucial. The transformation could be chemically induced. The ointment did not change the body. It changed the mind. But Arnald went further. He argued that certain people were naturally susceptible to these altered states, that the ointment only awakened something already present, and that in the lands of the north, where the ancient religion still pulsed beneath the Christian surface, this knowledge had been preserved and transmitted through generations. The Thomists demanded that Arnald be condemned for heresy, but Pope John XXII, himself interested in alchemy and medicine, protected the doctor. He only ordered that the experiments cease and that Arnold's treatise on lycanthropy be locked in the secret archives of the Vatican. It remained there for 600 years. When the archives were partially opened in the 20th century, historians found Arnold's manuscript. His conclusions were surprisingly modern. He had identified the hallucinogenic compounds, described the symptoms of alkaloid intoxication, connected the condition to psychological trauma and pagan rituals. But there was a final section, written in code, that was only deciphered in 1983. In it, Arnold admitted, "I treated the body and mind of these men, but something escapes the medical art. There is a hunger in them that no herb comes, a thirst that no prayer quenches, as if something ancient prior to Christ, prior to Homi, had marked their souls." This confession from one of the greatest medieval physicians is revealing. Even with his advanced pharmacological knowledge, he detected something more. something that science did not explain, and the cases kept appearing. In 1340, while the Black Death devastated Europe and eliminated 1/3 of the population, something sinister began to happen in the remote regions of Scandinavia. Danish authorities recorded a surge of attacks attributed to werewolves. But there was a strange pattern. The attacks focused on communities that had recently adopted Christianity. The victims were often priests, nuns, or zealous converts, and the perpetrators, when captured, confessed freely. One case exemplifies the situation. In Viborg, Jutland, a man named Erik Bladax, himself baptized Christian only 3 years earlier, was arrested after killing a Franciscan missionary. Under interrogation, Erik denied nothing. The ancient gods demand blood, he declared. Odin Allfather promised Valhalla to those who die in battle. But you Christians have banned holy wars, banned sacrifices. How can we honor the gods? How can we reach Valhalla? The interrogator Friar Henrik of Bremen recorded, I asked him if he truly believed he transformed into a wolf. He replied that he wore the wolf skin and became a wolf in spirit, if not in flesh, that the god Odin had taught men this art, that his ancestors had practiced it for 1,000 years. Friar Henrik realized something that most of his contemporaries had missed. Lycanthropy was not just peasant superstition. It was organized religious resistance. The last Norse pagans were using the ancient magic of the Berserkers as a weapon against forced Christianization. The church reacted with violence in 1352. King Valdemar IV of Denmark, pressured by the Archbishop of Lund, promulgated the laws against lupin sorcery. Anyone found with wolfskins, suspicious ointments, or runic texts about Hamferi would be burned alive without trial. Hundreds died. The practices went underground, but they did not disappear. The Inquisition archives, now preserved in Copenhagen, reveal that even in 1500, more than 500 years after the official Christianization of Scandinavia, cases of lycanthropy continued to emerge. A report from 1512 from Inquisitor Alois describes a secret cult in Sweden that performed nocturnal rituals using wolf skins and invoking Odin. When authorities raided the location, a remote cave in Dalarna, they found something disturbing. 17 wolfskins, carefully preserved and marked with runes, pots of ointment, and, hanging on the walls of the cave, drawings of Ulfhédnar that dated from the Viking age. This was not an improvised cult. It was uninterrupted tradition, maintained secretly through generations, preserving knowledge from over 1,000 years ago. But the question remained, what exactly happened when someone used the ointment and the skin? Was the transformation real or illusory? In 1564, a German physician named Johann Weyer published the Treatise de Praestiges Daemonum on the illusions of the demons. Weyer was the personal physician to the Duke of Cleves and one of the first psychiatrists in history. He systematically investigated cases of witchcraft and lycanthropy. His conclusions were revolutionary and dangerous. Weyer argued that most witches and werewolves were, in fact, mentally ill, that the ointments caused powerful hallucinations, that the transformation occurred only in the individual's mind, and that burning these people was murder, not justice. But Weyer was honest about the limits of his theory. In a rarely cited chapter, he admits, there are cases that defy explanation. I found a man in Westphalia who, upon using a wolf skin, displayed strength that 4 men could not contain. I examined him after the fit. His hands were lacerated, as if by claws, his face marked by wounds that only wild beasts cause, and he remembered nothing except dreams of hunting and blood. Weyer concluded that, in these rare cases, something beyond melancholy operates. Whether nature, demon, or God, I do not dare to judge. Weyer's treatise almost led him to the stake. Only the Duke's protection saved him, but his ideas planted seeds of doubt. If transformation was mental, not physical, then executing lycanthropes was a medical error, not divine justice. Other doctors began to investigate. In 1508, the Dutch anatomist Peter Pauw dissected the brain of a man executed for lycanthropy in Leiden. He found structural alterations. He wrote, "This brain is not normal. There is an excess of black humors. The convolutions are irregular, as if something in this organ prevented the man from controlling his bestial nature." Pauw was describing, with 16th century vocabulary, what modern neurologists would call brain lesions or chemical imbalances. But the most significant discovery came from the chemical analysis of the ointments. Doctors at the University of Padua in 1603 identified the main components: deadly nightshade, atropa belladonna, hanbane, hyoscyamus, nij, mandrake, mandragora, officinorum, and wolfsbane, aconitum, nipep. All of these plants contain tropane alkaloids, substances that cross the blood-brain barrier and cause intense hallucinations, loss of inhibition, sensation of flying or transformation, and subsequent amnesia. In other words, the ointment worked exactly as the lycanthropes described. It made them feel that they transformed into wolves. The question was whether it also caused the behavioral alterations, the superhuman strength, the violence, the apparent insensitivity to pain. And tests on animals suggested yes. The decisive breakthrough came from an unexpected source in 1615, during the trial of Jean Grenier, the boy wolf of Bordeaux, whose case will be detailed in another chapter. The court ordered a complete medical investigation. Jean, only 15 years old, had confessed to killing and partially devouring several children. He claimed to transform into a wolf by using an ointment and a skin given to him by the lord of the forest. The court, composed of enlightened judges, suspected madness rather than demonic possession. The royal doctors examined Jean for weeks. Their reports, preserved in the Bordeaux archives, are extraordinarily detailed. They discovered that Jean suffered from extreme malnutrition and possible rickets. His teeth were abnormal, the canines excessively developed, projecting over the lower lip. His nails were thick, curved, blackened, similar to claws. His behavior included walking on all fours, refusal to speak, attempts to bite the guards. But the most revealing, they found a pot of ointment in his possession. Analyzed, it was revealed to contain not only the usual hallucinogenic herbs, but also human fat and a macabre detail, calcined bone powder. When confronted, Jean admitted to removing the fat from his victims, that the lord of the forest had taught him that this potentiated the ointment, that each new death made the transformation easier, mori compleci. The doctors were horrified, not by this superstition, but by the implication. Jean had developed a tolerance to the ointment and was progressively increasing the dosage. And the cannibalism was not ritual. It was a symptom of a profound psychopathy. The president of the court, P.A. Gilankri himself, a notorious witch hunter, made an unprecedented decision. He declared Gia not possessed, but insane. He sentenced him not to death, but to perpetual confinement in a month. The sentence established revolutionary jurisprudence. For the first time in a European court, lycanthropy had been officially classified as a mental illness, not a spiritual crime. But there were consequences. If lycanthropes were ill and not witches, then dozens, perhaps hundreds of people had been unjustly burned. The church, confronted with this problem, reacted by burying the cases. Archives were sealed, documents disappeared, and the lycanthropy trials, which had terrified Europe for 3 centuries, abruptly ceased after 1650, not because the condition had disappeared, but because it was admitting a monstrous error. However, in remote regions of Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, the traditions persisted. In 1722, the Swedish folklorist Johann Schefferus traveled through Lapland documenting the beliefs of the Sami, the indigenous people of the Scandinavian Arctic. Schefferus found something surprising. The Sami shamans practiced a form of ecstatic trance called joiking, during which they claimed to send their spirits in animal form. They used drums decorated with symbols of wolves, bears, and reindeer, and they described the experience in terms identical to the ancient Berserkers. The Noedi shaman lies down as if dead, Schefferus wrote. His spirit leaves the body and runs as a wolf or flies as a raven. Meanwhile, the body must not be disturbed. If someone touches it, the spirit cannot return, and the shaman dies. This 18th century description perfectly echoed the Norse texts from 1,000 years earlier. The continuity was undeniable. And Schefferus, a man of the Enlightenment and a skeptic by training, admitted to having witnessed these rituals. I saw with my eyes, he recorded, a Nawadi enter a trance. His body became rigid. His breathing almost ceased. He remained thus for 3 hours. When he awoke, he described events that had occurred 50 miles away. Events that, later verified, proved true. I cannot explain this by natural philosophy. The European scientific community ridiculed, but in the 20th century, anthropologists rediscovered his accounts and found exact parallels in shamanic cultures around the world, from Siberia to the Amazon, from Tibet to Central Africa. The ability to enter altered states of consciousness, to become an animal, to access impossible knowledge, was not a Norse peculiarity. It was a universal human characteristic, preserved in shamanic traditions, but lost or suppressed in Western civilization. The Berserkers in Ulfheðnar were not aberrant. They were the last warrior shamans of Europe. And when the church and state finally eradicated them, something was lost. An ancient knowledge about the malleability of consciousness, about the extreme states of which the human mind is capable, about the fine line between man and beast. This knowledge survived only in fragments, in the Icelandic sagas, in the secret archives of the Vatican, in Renaissance medical manuscripts, in the folk accounts of the remote corners of Europe, and in the confessions of the last werewolves, men who, under torture or trial, described experiences that science still struggles to fully understand. Because the question was never whether the transformation was real. The question was, what does it mean to be human when the very perception of reality can be altered so profoundly that we cease to recognize our own form? In the next chapter of Lost Legends, we will delve into Medieval Tehoch, the werewolf trials, where the Inquisition tribunals documented detailed confessions from men who claimed to devour children in lupin form. Prepare to discover the cases of Pierre Bourget, Gilles Garnier, and Jean Grenier, trials that revealed not only heinous crimes, but a disturbing window into the psychology of human horror. Because sometimes the true monster doesn't need physical transformation to terrorize.